It goes without saying that this is a massive game for the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football in LA. Let's talk about just how significant it is with some numbers.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We are the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show, you can, of course, subscribe and join the everydayers. I still remember you everydayers and all those out there that make us their first listen and keep us part of their routine as they try to stay up to date as the Bengals navigate a difficult season this year. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel, where you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com to check that out. And James, there are some injuries that we're keeping an eye on for this team this week. We will discuss some key starters that are on the injury report and their prognosis as the Bengals are going to be heading out to Los Angeles on Friday. But before we get there, I mentioned it at the top. Obviously, a huge game for the Bengals this week. You don't have to look at statistical models to know that. Getting to 5-6 going into the bye versus dropping to 4-7 going into the bye is an intuitively massive difference. But we do have some numbers we can look at as well. The Bengals face a 30% playoff odds swing again this week. If they win, the PFF model has them at 47% to make the playoffs. If they lose, 16% to make the playoffs, a 30% difference, 31% difference, in fact, based on the result this weekend.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'm pretty confident just talking with veterans in the locker room. That 16% might as well be zero. They know how important this game is. And they going to 4-7 and talking playoffs is not something that you, regardless if you have Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow and they're playing great and, oh man, Trey Hendrickson, and I will not talk playoffs, period, next week if they're 4-7, because that's such a distant thing. Bad football teams are 4-7. Playoff teams are not. And does that mean that there isn't a path after this week? Of course there's a path, but it gets much, much tougher. And at some point you got to show who you are. And last week was one of those moments, and there was a lot of good in last week. They lost the game because there was also a lot of bad. You have to be a little bit better this week. At the same time, if you go to Los Angeles and you play the way you did in Baltimore, there's reason to believe, especially if your stars play the way they did, that you can win that game. And so get this win, lick your wounds during the bye, and gear up for December and early January for a sprint in the final month plus of the season where you're going to need to stack wins. They haven't really done it this year yet, and this needs to be the start of it. And maybe they go out and they do it, and if so, then you'll see almost the light at the end of the tunnel, which has been such a weird season. But if you fall into a 4-7 hole, I'm afraid that there really aren't many ladders that allow you to climb out of it. And if you get to 5-6, you're almost even with the ground. And even in the playoff race, you're nearly have a 50% chance of making the postseason. And all you got to do is get in. I don't think there's a team in the AFC that would want to see the Bengals in the first round of the playoffs. You don't want to deal with that quarterback and the firepower around him, regardless of how flawed this team is. So you just got to get in. And I think, Jake, if we're talking about, if this is Locked On Bengals path to the playoffs, how the Bengals get to the playoffs, it has to start with a win in Los Angeles. Because if they lose on Sunday, I don't see how they realistically are going to be that team that can make that run and climb out of the hole they're in.
You mentioned at some point they have to show who they are. That assumes, of course, that they haven't shown us who they are yet. And maybe we've just seen who they are. If they are not who they've shown us to be so far, I do think that, like their path to the playoffs, that needs to start sooner than later. That needs to start this week against a good team that they're playing in the Los Angeles Chargers that have found their footing coming out of their bye week. Justin Herbert playing a much better brand of football than he did to start the season, and Harbaugh's guys buying into Harbaugh's culture, the defense, the best scoring defense in the league. Although PFF would have you believe they are not close to the best defense in the league, they have had the best results of any defense in the league. A lot of that informed by their strength of opponent and their strength of victory. I think they're the second lowest strength of victory in the AFC, with only the Bengals having a lower strength of victory. So tells you a little bit of something about who the Chargers have played, because they've won 6 games and the Bengals have only won 4. And those strength of victory metrics get a little bit weird when you're dealing with small sample sizes. But as you said, James, if they're going to show us that they are somebody else than they've shown us to be so far, which is a team that can't finish games and can't find the one more play to win games, this is as good a time as any to start that, because of the stakes. And it's not just the Chargers. I mean, they should be incredibly grateful right now that there's a 7th playoff team in the current NFL format, because if there were 6, their playoff odds would be vanishingly small already, because they would be trying to catch up directly with the team they're playing this weekend, the Los Angeles Chargers at 6-3, currently in that 6th seed. But since their competition remains the Denver Broncos and Indianapolis Colts primarily, and that's if they win, that goes a long way in bolstering their chances to sneak in as that 7th seed. And you mentioned the ladder back up to ground level. I would say the ground is a little bit lower than it was to start the season in terms of the level they would be reaching to sneak in as a 7th seed versus what we were talking about for preseason expectations for this team. But you're right, if they get into the playoffs and they have the quarterback playing the way he's playing this year, that gives them a chance. But again, this to me, a lot of this comes back to the fact that there is a seventh team in the playoffs in each conference right now. That is a huge benefit to the Bengals this year at 4-7, where most years, or 4-6, where most years you're not talking about the playoffs at that point. And you said we won't be doing it next week. Prior to this playoff format change, we wouldn't be talking about it this week. And the fact that it's the Colts and the Broncos that you're dealing with as a competition to get that spot. It's not necessarily the Titans of the world that you're dealing with as your competition there.
Yeah, and no doubt. I think that's a big part of why I'm still optimistic, but why it's like, okay, well, the Chargers, I think they're a good team, but at some point you have to beat a good team if you are a playoff team. At some point you have to show that you're deserving of a playoff berth. And how do you do that? But you start by winning some of these games that you should, or that we at least had you winning coming into the year. And let's be honest, the ground floor in really, that's getting back to 500 in my mind. That isn't, for me, that isn't preseason expectations, because they really can't do that anymore. There's really no way for them to meet our preseason expectations from a regular season perspective.
Yeah, that was my only point, is that the floor is down now from where it was preseason.
No doubt. And so what it is all right, can they figure it out enough, knowing their flaws, knowing how well Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are playing? Can they get healthy at the right time? Can they get hot to end November, this is their last game in November, and then you welcome the Steelers to town on December 1st with a ton on the line there. And if you can do that, if you can get these two, then you're back to 6-6. But how do you get 2 in a row? You got to get the first one. And this is a huge one. This is a quality Chargers team. It's an AFC North style team. The Chargers could switch with the Browns, and they play pretty similar to an AFC North team. The way they win with defense and running game, and they're pretty damn disciplined when it comes to those things and sticking with their brand of football. So the Bengals, they're going to have to play at that level. I think it's a nice test. It's a huge test, and we'll see if they can get it done.
Bit of a litmus test for both teams, as we discussed on the crossover yesterday. Coming up next, let's discuss the paths to victory in this game. Will Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase get some help, or is it going to have to be the Joe and Jamar show once again as the Bengals go to take on a stingy defense and an offense that's found its footing a little bit in recent weeks? We will discuss that coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Mint Mobile. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contracts. Ditch overplayed wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnfl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnfl. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnfl. That's MINT mobile.com/lockedonnfl. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on their first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This episode of Locked On Bengals also sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, with an awesome offer right now. All you got to do to take advantage of that awesome offer, if you are a new customer, is place a $5 bet. And when you win that $5 bet, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. That's for free if you win your first $5 bet. So if you're looking at the 1.5 point spread in Bengals Chargers this weekend at FanDuel.com and you're interested there, great. That makes it easy. Maybe you're looking at the money line straight up where the Bengals are plus 110. Maybe you're looking at one of the interesting props, like each team is going to score in all 4 quarters and you're expecting a ton of points. That's plus 800. Well, FanDuel has all those options and player props and so much more. Not only that, but for live betting, you can check out stats and live play-by-play in the same place you place your bets with FanDuel. You can check it out at FanDuel.com to join today. Again, that's $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
One of the big reasons, Jake, why we're optimistic still at 4-6, and we're optimistic even though the Bengals haven't beaten a team with a winning record, and we're optimistic despite the fact that they can't finish games. And really, the only reason I would say it isn't coaching, it isn't the offensive line, it isn't the awesome pass rush. It's Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. And as we record this, I'm 1 seat over from where Jamar was like an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago after practice. It's kind of wild because I'm sure you watched both press conferences, but Joe Burrow really loose, calm, cool, collected, joking around on Wednesday, and Jamar Chase the same way today on Thursday. I think it's interesting that the 2 stars that certainly set the tone, that everyone knows the Bengals need them to play at a high level, their attitude this week where they're focused, I have no doubt about that, but it's not like they were throwing chairs. They were joking around, and I saw that in the locker room as well as when they were up here at the press conference room.
Yeah, I feel like I felt that when I watched Mike Hilton talking in his locker after Thursday's practice as well. There's certainly an understanding of where they are, and you could feel that with Joe Burrow as well, talking about the way he's going to have to play because they're 4-6 and acknowledging the situation that they're in, but they're also, as you said, loose, joking around. And I do find that interesting. I agree with you that the reasons for optimism for this team start with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm strictly speaking optimistic. I don't know if I'm quite glass half full. I'm kind of glass half. And I'm not quite pessimistic or optimistic, but I agree with you that reasons for optimism would certainly be Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase.
That's what I said.
Well,
that's the only reason.
You said the reasons we are optimistic. So I was just clarifying the we that you used. That's all. It's pedantic. I know. People are used to that.
If Joe Burrow wasn't on the team, they wouldn't have a shot in hell. If Jamar Chase wasn't on the team, they wouldn't have a shot in hell. That's all.
Yeah. And I think that point is well taken. The other reasons that you could throw into the mix are guys that we're watching on injury lists this week, but it starts with Joe and Jamar. That is the reason that they almost beat the Baltimore Ravens last week. That those 2 guys have put on shows in big games this year, and it just hasn't been enough, unfortunately. Whether that's their fault or not, and spoiler, it's mostly not. It kind of speaks to the state of the team. And so when we ask, does it have to be the Joe and Jamar show again? Well, largely, yes, it does. But they need somebody else still. And we're going to be asking this question again. They need someone else to help. They need other guys to make plays in pivotal moments because they haven't had those pivotal moment plays frequently enough, at least, especially against good teams this year. And as a result, if you're on social media this week and you're a Bengals fan, you're saying, oh, the Bengals would be 8-2 if you flipped every one score game result this year. Well, because they're not making those plays in those moments. You look at the betrayal index, which was up on The Athletic today. And that's essentially just a difference of your quarterback's performance versus your defense's performance. And the Bengals aren't winning these games when the defense lets them down, even when Joe Burrow plays great. And at some point, and you've seen this throughout NFL history, the most common comparison to this year's Bengals team is those Drew Brees Saints teams. At some point, the rest of the team is bad enough that even when you have stars playing at the level that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson, T. Higgins when he's on the field, and that's another topic that we'll get to. Even when those guys are playing at that level, you need team football. You still need it at some level. It can't be as bad as it's been for the Bengals, especially against good teams this year.
Yeah, it's what's so mind-boggling is how so many guys have regressed. Cam Taylor-Britt, for example, or just not gotten back to form at post-injury. Sam Hubbard, for example, or not developed, whether it's a Joseph Osai or maybe starting to develop but not getting enough opportunities because of injury, and now because Lou Anarumo likes playing Joseph Osai over Myles Murphy. Like so many things where it's those things. Like we've spent a lot of time the past this week, a whole show on the front office and discussing the state of things and everything that had gone wrong. Like, and I get it, but also some of it's just, why aren't some of these guys playing better than before? I'll give you another one. And I think this one's interesting because we focus so much on defense, and Mike Hilton brought it up on Thursday. And on the surface, I get it, right? You have a 5'9" nickel cornerback. You take him off the field on third down. Do you think they should be taking him off the field on third downs on Sunday in a run-heavy game with Justin Herbert? Not great wide receivers. They're not a lot of speedy guys. I would try to find a way to get 21 on the field as much as possible. And mostly because they don't have many playmakers on this defense, Jake. And I do think that's one of the things. A lot of people have made a big deal about the Myles Murphy lack of snaps, and I agree with that. He should play more, at least on pass rush downs. But the other element, it's not like these cornerbacks and safeties are covering at a high level anyway. So why in the heck can't you find a way to get Mike Hilton on the field? At least he's making some plays and tackling at a high level.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear him talk about that after Thursday's practice and say that there have been conversations with Lou Anarumo about it. This goes back to previous years when they were finding ways to keep him on the field when it didn't make sense to have a nickel corner on the field. They were matching 12 personnel and keeping Mike Hilton on the field at times. When they would go to certain 3 safety looks last year, they were having Mike Hilton playing more safety responsibilities. And for whatever reason this year, maybe because they have 5 safeties on the roster, I don't know, that could have something to do with it. Mike Hilton isn't getting those opportunities as much, despite being probably, maybe not even probably, certainly the best player in the secondary for the Bengals this year. And
by far, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a debate, but it is interesting from a matchup perspective too. Like, do you want to keep him on the field and have him dealing with Vlad McConkey and clear passing situations? I understand why that would potentially be a question mark, but like, who else are you putting on the field in that spot that's going to be better? If you had like legitimate options, like maybe if it's Dax Hill, DJ Turner, right? And you want to put Dax in the slot there or whatever, DJ Turner in the slot there, whatever it is, maybe then you can start to think about it a little bit. But given the state of the secondary, the way those guys are playing, yeah, I agree with you. Taking Mike Hilton off the field doesn't intuitively compute.
He would be their second best edge rusher.
Oh, no.
I mean,
you're only a little bit joking.
It kinda, but like, he can blitz, man. like, you know, like that's what I think is interesting. And so part of this now, and part of the must win is, it's all right, mad scientist Lou, find the right elixir to get a win going into the bye. And part of getting a win is not banking on your offense to score 30 points against a defense that hasn't given up 20 points this year in a game. And maybe they do. Maybe the offense still goes off, but that is something I'm certainly watching. So it isn't just the Joe and Jamar show. Plenty more to discuss, including health, injuries to watch for that we'll be monitoring. We will do that coming up next. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend your time wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is now offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, The Great American Story, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and a brand new documentary-style course as well. All you have to do is go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever, tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Like I said, go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon.
Before we dive into injuries, James, a few interesting themes and trends for this LA Chargers team that I wanted to mention here, because you've talked about them being disciplined and sticking with their run. And it's interesting because they're kind of going away from that a little bit, at least in recent weeks. Justin Herbert getting healthier. He's more of a part of their run game. Remember Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator, former Baltimore offensive coordinator, someone certainly that Lou Anarumo is familiar with, and this Bengals coaching staff has seen a whole lot of when he was the coordinator with the Ravens. And you're starting to see Justin Herbert on some of those quarterback designed runs, especially last week. But what's interesting to me, James, is you look at their neutral pass rate and their pass rate over expected. The last 4 weeks, the Chargers are passing the ball at a top 10 frequency in the NFL on neutral downs and have a pass rate over expected in the top 10 as well, at 8th in the NFL. So they're going away from relying on their run game. Perhaps a realization that the run game, the interior offensive line, not necessarily suited to the kind of run game they want to use, although you're seeing more of Justin Herbert in that role with him getting a little bit healthier and him being a big guy who's obviously an athletic player at quarterback, difficult to bring down. Just some interesting trends there. A couple of other interesting trends. You look at rushing EPA per play and rushing success rate. These are some metrics that the Bengals defense actually has been significantly better at in the last 4 weeks, ranking in the middle of the pack for opposing team rushing success rate lately in the last 4 weeks. And surprisingly, they've actually been decent, bottom third of the pack, I guess, bottom middle of the pack in passing EPA numbers. The big issue for them has been explosive plays for the Bengals, and that is somewhere where in the last 4 weeks, the Chargers have been the best offense in the NFL at generating explosive. Justin Herbert has been lethal throwing the ball downfield, something that I think the Bengals secondary certainly will be aware of and need to keep ceiling over this week.
Yeah, I think that's the natural progression when you can run the ball like they've been able to run the ball, right? And then you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert, who is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And health probably does have something to do with that. I think Lad McConkey, aka one of my draft crushes, developing certainly helped that. And so I think it's a mixture. But look, it's going to be hard. This is a tough game. That's why last week it was going into that Ravens game. It's like, man, if you could just get this Ravens game, it'll take a little pressure off. And now all of the pressure is on. You have to get this one. It's all on the Bengals. There isn't really much pressure on the Chargers because they're not going to win their division. They're just not catching the Chiefs. And it would be nice for them because they're going into a hard stretch to get the win, but they don't need it. The Bengals need it. And that's the other element here is if you can get the win, you bring the Chargers back to the pack in that wild card race right before they start this tough stretch of games that they have. So it's going to be tough. And there's so much pressure on Lou. I think Lou's got to find a way to get Cam Taylor-Britt right. I do think it's noteworthy. He was asked on Wednesday and Thursday about talking to the media, and he said he just wants to play football. I think it's interesting. Does that mean – because there's going to be some that hear that and say, all right, well, that means he's dialed in. I love it, locked in. Fine. Maybe that's the case. Maybe his confidence is so shaken he doesn't want to talk, which I'm not saying is the case. I'm just going over it. They need Cam Taylor-Britt to play better. Starting Sunday. It has to happen. You can't get beat. Like 2 weeks ago against the Raiders, wasn't it a simple slant with Jacoby Myers? He gets turned around. I mean, that just, it can't happen. He's not playing at that kind of level. So when you talk about the explosive plays and the downfield stuff, it's like, oh, obviously they have to stop the run, and they've been better against the run, especially compared to earlier in the season. But these corners, this secondary has to be so much better on Sunday.
And a lot of this comes to the defensive line, in my opinion, and the defensive line, front seven, front six, whoever's on the field doing their jobs in the run game, not requiring the defense to spend extra resources there, something they had the luxury of doing more often when DJ Reader was on the team, because he was able to do often the job of more than one guy on that defensive front, where this year you're seeing them having to sell out a little bit more at times to deal with the run and leaving them more vulnerable in other ways. Against this team, you're going to want to keep two safeties back. And one of the things that perhaps the coaching staff needs to look at is how they're asking Geno Stone to cover more ground than he was asked to cover in Baltimore. The alignment of Sheldon Rankins to try to revitalize those two free agents that you got that we spent a lot of time talking about this week, where those guys aren't playing up to the level that we've seen from them in their most recent seasons or throughout their career. And maybe there's a fit issue there in addition to a transition issue or a coaching issue or whatever it is, or a player issue. The whole thing needs to be schematically sound, I think, this week to deal with the Chargers offense that, in my opinion, is ascending, but hasn't really faced a ton of tests this year. They did face the Chiefs. They did face the Cardinals. Now they get another good offense to face with the Cincinnati Bengals this year to challenge that defense in particular. But a huge factor, James, as we're looking ahead to this game, are these injuries that we're watching. And it's a bunch of key starters for the Bengals that have been limited this week on the injury report. And first and foremost, T. Higgins limited again on Thursday. Trey Hendrickson, a DNP on Thursday, but the designation added for him on the injury report was not injury-related rest. So perhaps just a rest day there Thursday for Trey Hendrickson. Also questionable, also limited on the injury report, I should say, Logan Wilson, BJ Hill. Orlando Brown gets upgraded to limited. Obviously, Logan Wilson and BJ Hill playing is pretty important. Those guys have been around recently, but getting T. Higgins and Orlando Brown back, if that is possible this week, be a massive shot in the arm for a Bengals offense that's relied so much, as we recently discussed like 10 minutes ago, on Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase.
Yeah, it would be huge. And I think T's going to play. I do. It seems like it's trending in the right direction. Maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. I've not talked to T. I have not been told that he's going to play. You just can kind of, when you're here, you can kind of get a read on it. Feels like he's going to play. And by the way, 2 nights ago, before Wednesday's practice, I wouldn't have said it. I thought the other way. I was leaning the other way, but it feels like he knows the importance. And that's what I would tell him. I would be like, look, T, if we lose, one, you have to bye. 2, that's pretty much it anyway. And if you win, you still have the bye to hopefully get to 100% for the stretch run. And we're still in it. And it's kind of that cut and dry. Orlando, I think his injury, what's unique about Orlando's injury is we've never gotten full clarity on what it is, right? It was the knee, then the calf, then the fibula. Now it's knee and fibula is what it's like officially listed as. I think he's got a shot, and that one's up in the air still. We'll see. But having Orlando back would be huge. T back would be huge. Trey is going to play. I'd be shocked if he didn't. I think that's maintenance day for Trey for sure. And you give him all the maintenance he needs, because obviously you're going to need him on Sunday night to get after Justin Herbert.
On the Chargers side of things, Khalil Mack remained a non-participant on Wednesday this week. So that's the big one. Did he not practice Thursday as well? Am I looking at the wrong date here?
They're on your time, so I don't think we've seen the practice report for the Chargers yet.
No,
I expect him to play. From the sound of it, I think they've been maintaining him too.
Yeah. I was eventually going to get there, but yes, I agree. I think that it's more of a trying to get him to the game as healthy as he can be, as he's going to continue to play through a groin issue. Joey Bosa's workload continues to increase as he works back from a hip injury. He was limited on Wednesday. Christian Fulton back on the practice field, limited, coming off a hamstring injury on Wednesday. And he has been, I think, their most reliable corner this year. So interesting to think about a couple of rookie corners that otherwise would be trying to deal with this Bengals receiving core, especially if T. Higgins gets back. And these are the questions that we don't have answers to right now on Thursday after recording, or as we're recording, because, well, we don't have the Thursday injury report for the Chargers yet, or the Friday injury report for either team, obviously. But those are some big pieces for both teams that we'll have to watch the status of heading into this game. And I can't underline the importance enough here, James. Like we have with many games this year, it's another critical game. And the reason that they remain critical is that they remain in the race from a mathematical perspective. And as you said earlier, at some point, if they're going to figure it out and be a team that's going to threaten the playoffs, they need to show it against a good team. And going into a bye at 5-6 instead of 4-7 in the thick of that AFC wildcard picture is the start to doing that. We'll be back on Sunday Night Football coming up.
Whew.
James is ready to take a nap on that flight to LA.
Mm-hmm.
Bengals back in SoFi for the first time since the Super Bowl. A storyline that we haven't even talked about this week. I don't think it's necessarily important, but it's not. Didn't even come up.
When I think about that, I just think about Jamar throwing his helmet on that final play.
Hopefully not a sight that we're treated to this weekend. That would be frustrating. Regardless, we'll be back with you after the game here on Locked On Bengals. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.